Billionaire dad won't support his kid until a homeless man changes everything. Why would a ruthless billionaire handcuff himself to a homeless man for 24 hours after his own son publicly accused him of abandonment? He thought it was a clever PR stunt to save his image. But the shocking twist comes not from the cameras, but from the homeless man himself, whose quiet wisdom about fatherhood leads to the billionaire's stunning, unscripted, tearful breakdown and public apology. Subscribe, like, and listen now to discover how this desperate gamble led to an unexpected path toward redemption. James Carter surveyed the Los Angeles skyline from his office, a minimalist expanse of glass and steel on the 50th floor of Carter Tower. The city, sprawling beneath him, was a canvas upon which he painted his legacy. Carter Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar real estate development corporation synonymous with opulent resorts, exclusive gated communities, and uncompromising luxury. At 55, James was the embodiment of corporate power. Impeccably tailored suit, steely gray eyes that missed nothing, an aura of command honed over decades of ruthless deal-making. He had built an empire, but the foundations rested on a personal life as cold and sparsely furnished as his office. He was a widower, though the term felt inadequate. His marriage to Emily, 20 years ago, had been a brief, passionate interlude in his relentless climb. She was warm, vibrant, an artist who saw colors where James saw only profit margins. Their whirlwind romance and subsequent marriage had surprised everyone, including James himself. But the demands of his burgeoning empire quickly overshadowed their life together. Emily, struggling with his long hours and emotional distance, grew increasingly unhappy. Their son, Liam, was born into this strained environment. Then, when Liam was just 3 years old, Emily died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, leaving James utterly adrift, ill-equipped for single fatherhood, consumed by a grief he refused to acknowledge. His solution was tragically pragmatic. He buried his grief in work, doubling down on building Carter Enterprises into an unassailable fortress. Liam became another project to be managed, outsourced. He was sent to the most exclusive boarding schools on the East Coast, provided with generous trust funds managed by accountants, visited infrequently during scheduled holidays that James often cut short for business emergencies. James told himself he was providing Liam with the best opportunities, fostering independence, shielding him from the emotional void he himself couldn't fill. He avoided difficult conversations, ignored emotional needs, and communicated primarily through his administrative assistant regarding logistics and finances. He built walls around his heart, convinced that empire building was his only true calling, his only real strength. Now, Liam was 17, a bright, sensitive young man who resembled his mother. He was adrift in his own gilded cage. He had every material advantage: designer clothes, cutting-edge gadgets, access to exclusive clubs, but lacked the one thing he craved: his father's time, attention, genuine affection. His attempts to connect during school breaks were usually met with distracted nods, brief, awkward dinners, or last-minute cancellations. He saw his father's face more often on magazine covers than across a dinner table. The resentment simmered, fueled by years of perceived neglect. The breaking point came after James missed Liam's championship lacrosse game, a game Liam had specifically asked him to attend, his voice hopeful over the phone. James had initially agreed, then canceled hours before, citing an unavoidable board meeting, which Liam later discovered through online news alerts was actually a high-profile golf tournament with potential investors. Feeling utterly invisible, hurt, and angry, Liam did something impulsive, something born of teenage angst and years of frustration. He posted a video on his private, but widely followed, Instagram account. It wasn't polished or planned. Just Liam, sitting in his dorm room, looking directly into his phone camera, his voice trembling but clear. "My dad is James Carter," he began, naming one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. "He builds luxury resorts for the richest people in the world. He gives millions to charity galas for the photo op. But his own son? I guess I'm not a good investment." He detailed the missed game, the years of boarding schools, the feeling of being a financial line item rather than a child. He tells the world he builds communities. Liam's voice cracked, but he abandoned his own family. "I just wanted a dad. Is that too much to ask?" He ended the video abruptly, tears visible in his eyes. Within hours, the video escaped the confines of his followers. Someone screen recorded it, shared it on Twitter, and it exploded. Hashtag Carter Coldheart. Hashtag Billionaire Abandonment. Hashtag Where is James Carter trended globally. News outlets picked up the story. Talk shows debated James Carter's parenting. Activist groups seized the opportunity to criticize Carter Enterprises' focus on luxury development amidst LA's homelessness crisis. Protesters gathered outside Carter Tower, holding signs comparing James to Scrooge. Major investors called, demanding reassurance. Luxury hotel brands partnered with Carter Enterprises issued concerned statements. James Carter, the master manipulator of his own image, found his reputation, and by extension, his companies, in freefall, undone by the raw, honest pain of his neglected son. The gilded cage had cracked, and the fallout was immediate and brutal. The sleek, minimalist boardroom on the 50th floor felt more like a war room. James Carter sat at the head of the massive table, his face a stony mask, but the slight tremor in his hand as he gripped a pen betrayed the internal chaos. Opposite him sat his core crisis team. Eleanor Vance, his sharp, unflappable head of communications, David Chun, his pragmatic chief legal counsel, and Arthur Finch, the veteran chairman of the board, his expression grim. "The fallout is escalating," Eleanor reported, scrolling through updates on her tablet. Major media outlets are running follow-up pieces. Family values groups are calling for boycotts. 2 institutional investors have paused further funding rounds pending review. The St. Regis partnership is demanding a public statement clarifying our corporate commitment to family. Liam's video has struck a nerve, David Chen added. It taps into public resentment about wealth inequality and corporate detachment. Standard denials or polished apologies won't cut it. They'll look insincere. "We need something drastic, James," Arthur Finch stated bluntly. "Something that demonstrates humility, empathy, something that shows you're not the cold-hearted caricature Liam painted." James remained silent, staring out at the city lights, the empire he'd built suddenly seeming fragile. Liam's words echoed in his head, abandoned. He'd always justified his distance as fostering independence, but seeing the raw pain in his son's viral video forced a flicker of unwelcome self-reflection. Was Liam right? "What are you proposing, Eleanor?" James finally asked, his voice low. Eleanor took a deep breath. "We've been brainstorming radical options. One idea. It's high risk, extremely unconventional, but potentially high reward. Involves demonstrating your willingness to understand hardship firsthand, to connect with the city's most vulnerable, right here outside our own building." She outlined the plan. James Carter, the billionaire CEO, would voluntarily spend 24 hours handcuffed to a homeless person, living on the street, experiencing their reality, all under the full glare of the media. The goal? To shatter the ivory tower image, show vulnerability, and dominate the news cycle with a narrative of empathy, however staged. David Chun immediately objected. Eleanor, the legal risks are astronomical. False imprisonment, liability, safety concerns, and the optics could backfire horribly. He could look foolish, exploitative, which is why the execution and the partner are critical, Eleanor countered. It has to be voluntary, fully documented consent, and the individual needs to be sympathetic but resilient, not obviously impaired or aggressive. Someone the public can empathize with, someone who can hold their own against James. Her team had already done preliminary, discreet reconnaissance. They identified Michael Mike Donovan, a man in his late 40s who often resided in the small park adjacent to Carter Tower. He was known to other homeless individuals and outreach workers as quiet, intelligent, keeping to himself, and notably sober. He seemed wary but dignified. James listened, initially appalled by the sheer audacity, the theatricality of it. Handcuffed to a homeless man? It sounded like a circus act, but desperation gnawed at him. The company was bleeding reputation and, by extension, value. Liam's accusation had hit a societal nerve. Maybe this extreme measure was the only way to cauterize the wound. Find him, James commanded curtly. Let's see if he'll even entertain this madness. The first meeting was a disaster. James, flanked by Eleanor and a security detail, approached Mike, who sat reading a worn paperback on a park bench. James, awkward and out of his element, made the initial offer through Eleanor. $50,000 for 24 hours of his time, handcuffed together, media present. Mike looked up from his book, his eyes clear, intelligent, weary, assessing James with unnerving calm. He listened without interruption, then slowly shook his head, a faint, wry smile touching his lips. $50,000, he repeated softly. To be your performing monkey? Your prop in some billionaire's redemption play. He closed his book. No, thank you, Mr. Carter. My dignity isn't for sale. He stood up and walked away, leaving James stunned and humiliated. Round 2 required a different approach. The PR crisis had worsened. James went back the next day, alone this time except for Eleanor standing at a distance. He ditched the power suit for casual slacks and a sweater. He found Mike sketching in a notepad. Mr. Donovan, Mike, James began, swallowing his pride. Yesterday, I handled that badly. My company is in crisis because of mistakes I've made as a father. This stunt, he admitted, it's a gamble to try and fix my public image. But maybe, he hesitated, searching for the right angle. Maybe it could also shine a light on the reality you face every day. We'd have the media's attention. You could talk about what people need, what needs to change. Mike looked skeptical. And you'd listen? Or just smile for the cameras? I would try, James said, the admission feeling surprisingly honest. He then added the element his PR team had coached him on, though it felt manipulative. Look, I know $50,000 might not mean much. I mean, it's a lot, but not for... He fumbled. Eleanor subtly cleared her throat. James changed tack. What if, besides the personal payment, Carter Enterprises makes a substantial, immediate donation, say $250,000, to the downtown shelters, and guarantees media time for you to speak, uncensored? He saw a flicker of interest in Mike's eyes. He pressed on, hating the feeling but driven by necessity. Please, Mike, I need this. Maybe we can both get something out of it besides spectacle. He even managed a clumsy, on-camera plea when he noticed a news van pulling up nearby, alerted by his PR team. Mike studied James for a long moment, then sighed, rubbing his temples. One day, he said finally, 24 hours. You donate that $250,000 to the shelters up front. I get the $50,000 personally, no strings attached. And I say what I want of the cameras. You got lawyers? Get the waivers ready. He looked at James, his expression unreadable. But understand this, Mr. Carter. You're stepping into my world. Don't expect it to be comfortable. James felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. The desperate gamble was on. The waivers were signed, the donation wired, the media alerted. The clock would start tomorrow morning, chaining the billionaire to the homeless man in the heart of the city he thought he ruled. The morning dawned gray and humid, reflecting James Carter's mood. A small crowd had gathered in the park beside Carter Tower. Media crews with cameras jostling for position, a handful of protesters holding signs, curious onlookers, and several members of the local homeless community watching with guarded expressions. Mike Donovan stood waiting, impassive, dressed in his usual worn jeans and jacket. James arrived, looking stiff and uncomfortable in a tailored dark suit chosen by Eleanor to maximize the visual contrast. A representative from a private security firm, hired to ensure safety and manage the handcuff logistics, produced a single pair of gleaming steel cuffs. With cameras flashing and rolling, the cuff was first secured around Mike's left wrist, then around James's right. A tangible link, cold and heavy, now bound the CEO to the homeless man. The 24-hour countdown clock, displayed prominently on a nearby screen by the PR team, began ticking. The first few hours were excruciatingly awkward. Eleanor had provided a rough itinerary. Walk through specific areas, visit a soup kitchen for optics, engage with the public. James tried to maintain his CEO composure, offering tight smiles for the cameras, attempting polite conversation with Mike, who responded mostly in monosyllables, his gaze fixed ahead. Walking was clumsy, their differing strides requiring constant adjustment. The physical closeness felt unnatural, invasive. So, Mike, James attempted, surrounded by reporters shouting questions, tell us about your experiences. Mike glanced at him, then at the cameras. My experience, he said, his voice quiet but carrying, is sleeping on concrete because the shelters are full, is being invisible to people like you until you need a prop, is digging through trash for recyclables because a bottle return is worth more than an hour of some people's pity. His words were sharp, unscripted, cutting through James's practiced facade. James flinched, offering no reply. As they moved away from the immediate vicinity of Carter Tower, deeper into the less polished parts of downtown, the reality of Mike's world began to intrude more forcefully. James, used to curated environments, navigated cracked sidewalks, stepped awkwardly around overflowing dumpsters, the smells of refuse and exhaust thick in the air. He saw the subtle network of the street, the nods between homeless individuals, the shared cigarettes, the warnings about police sweeps, the locations of public restrooms or accessible water fountains. Mike moved through this world with a quiet competence that made James feel like a clumsy tourist. At the soup kitchen, James posed for photos, accepting a tray of bland stew he barely touched. Mike ate quickly, efficiently, wasting nothing. Later, trying to find a place to rest away from the media glare, Mike led James to a small alcove behind a warehouse. The concrete was hard, the air damp. James, accustomed to ergonomic chairs and climate control, felt acutely uncomfortable. As afternoon faded into evening, the temperature dropped. James, despite his expensive suit, began to shiver. The media presence lessened slightly, though a core group remained, documenting every moment. Mike, noticing James's discomfort, gathered discarded cardboard for insulation and, using a lighter and scavenged with scraps, skillfully built a small fire in a rusted oil drum nearby. The flickering flames cast long shadows, creating a pocket of warmth in the urban chill. They sat in silence for a long time, the fire crackling, the sounds of the city a distant hum. The performative aspect of the day seemed to recede slightly in the darkness. James, stripped of his usual buffers, felt a raw vulnerability he hadn't experienced in decades. "You cold, Mr. Carter?" Mike asked, breaking the silence. "A bit," James admitted reluctantly. Mike poked the fire. "Cold gets in your bones out here. So does the loneliness." He looked at James, his expression less guarded in the firelight. "Why do you really do this? Not just the PR." James hesitated. The question felt genuine. "My son," he said, the word catching in his throat. He said I abandoned him, that I only care about money." Maybe he's right. The admission hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Mike nodded slowly, feeding another piece of wood into the flames. "Kids need their fathers, more than they need things." He paused. "I used to be a foreman. Bridge construction. Good job, good money. Had a wife, a son, named Danny." His voice grew softer. "Fell off some scaffolding. Bad back, couldn't work the site anymore. Desk job, didn't pay enough. Painkillers got expensive. Lost the job, then the house. Wife took Danny and left. Couldn't blame her. Haven't seen him in, must be 12 years now. He'd be about Liam's age." He stared into the fire, the pain etched onto his face raw and undisguised. "I lost my son because I couldn't provide. Couldn't be the father he needed." He turned his gaze back to James, his eyes sharp with a sudden intensity. "You can provide, Carter. You have everything. And yet, you have a son right there and you don't cherish him? You push him away? What kind of man does that?" The question, devoid of malice but full of painful truth, struck James to the core. He thought of Liam, of Emily, of the years spent building an empire while his own family life crumbled. He saw his reflection in Mike's story. Another father separated from his son, albeit for vastly different reasons. The carefully constructed walls around James's heart began to crack. He didn't offer excuses or justifications. He just sat there, chained to this man who had lost everything yet somehow retained his humanity and felt the profound weight of his own failures. The shivering he felt wasn't just from the cold night air anymore. It was emanating from somewhere deep inside. The final hour of the 24-hour stunt felt both interminable and rushed. Dawn was breaking over Los Angeles, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beauty largely lost on James Carter. He felt physically drained, emotionally raw, and profoundly altered by the sleepless night spent chained to Mike Donovan. The conversations by the fire, Mike's quiet dignity in the face of immense hardship, and the stark comparison between their respective fatherhoods had irrevocably shifted something within him. The PR stunt, conceived in cynical desperation, had inadvertently become a crucible, burning away layers of his carefully constructed indifference. As the countdown clock in the park neared zero, the media presence swelled again, eager for the finale. James and Mike, looking weary but resolute, were escorted back to the designated spot near Carter Tower. Security personnel stood ready with the key. Cameras zoomed in as the final seconds ticked away. With a quiet click, the handcuffs were unlocked. A wave of applause, likely orchestrated by Eleanor Vance, rippled through the onlookers. James rubbed his wrist, a physical ache mirroring the deeper emotional one. He turned to Mike, holding the prepared $50,000 cashier's check. This was the scripted moment, the handshake, the photo op, the carefully worded statement about lessons learned. "Mike," James began, holding out the check, "thank you." As promised. But Mike held up a hand, stopping him. He took the check, glanced at it briefly, then turned to face the cameras, his expression serious. 24 hours ago, Mike said, his voice clear and steady, carrying over the hushed crowd. I agreed to this. Spectac. For the money, yes, but also for the chance to maybe make a small difference. He held up the check. This is $50,000. It's more money than I've seen in 15 years. It could change my life. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But my life isn't the only one that needs changing out here. He then did something completely unscripted, something that stunned James, Eleanor, and the entire media contingent into silence. I'm not keeping this money for myself, Mike declared. There's a community here, people I know, people who look out for each other, people who need basics just to survive another day. This family, as we call it, needs this more than I do. He walked over to where representatives from 2 local homeless outreach charities stood, invited by Eleanor for positive optics, never anticipating this. I want this entire amount, Mike stated firmly, handing the check over, split between your organizations. Use it for food, blankets, hygiene kits, socks, whatever people need right now. No overhead, no dilas. Just help people. The crowd erupted, this time in spontaneous, genuine applause. Mike's selfless act was electrifying. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed nonstop. Social media instantly lit up. Hashtag Mike Donovan Hero trending within minutes. Mike, the intended prop, had completely hijacked the narrative, transforming a cynical PR stunt into a moment of profound, unexpected altruism. James watched, humbled and awestruck. Mike's action underscored everything they had discussed during the night. The value of community, of compassion, of prioritizing others even when you have nothing. As the commotion swirled, James felt Mike's earlier words echo in his mind. You have a son and don't cherish him? And then his answer to James's own desperate question, if you were me, what would you do for your son? I would hug him every day. Money can't replace love. In that moment, the carefully crafted PR strategy, the corporate reputation, the stock prices, none of it mattered. Only Liam mattered. The years of neglect, the missed moments, the wall of wealth he'd built between them. It all felt like a crushing weight. He turned to Eleanor, his voice thick with emotion, barely audible over the crowd. Get Liam here. Now. Eleanor, surprised by the sudden, raw command, scrambled to make the call. Within 30 minutes, a bewildered and wary Liam arrived, escorted through the lingering crowd by security. He stopped several feet away from James, his expression guarded. James looked at his son, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. He saw not just the teenage defiance, but the underlying hurt, the echo of Emily in his eyes. The carefully planned closing statement forgotten, James Carter did the most unscripted, uncharacteristic thing of his life. He walked towards Liam, past the surprised security guards, past the clicking cameras, and sank to his knees on the pavement before his 17-year-old son. Liam, James choked out, tears streaming down his face, oblivious to the flashing cameras or the stunned silence of the crowd. I was wrong. About everything. I failed you. I failed your mother's memory. I hid behind my work, my money. I abandoned you. You were right. His voice broke. I am so sorry. I'm not worthy of being your father. But I want to be. Please, can you ever forgive me? The raw, public confession, the billionaire CEO kneeling in repentance before his estranged son, was the most powerful image of the day, far exceeding any staged empathy. It was the shattering of an empire's facade and the painful, uncertain beginning of a father's awakening. James Carter's public apology, raw and unprecedented, became the defining moment of the handcuff stunt, eclipsing even Mike Donovan's selfless act. It signaled not just a PR recovery, but the potential for genuine personal transformation. The journey, however, was far from over. It was merely beginning. Returning to Carter Enterprises, James faced a mixture of relief, skepticism, and outright resistance. While the immediate PR crisis subsided, replaced by cautious optimism from some quarters, his board and senior executives were wary. His first major announcement confirmed their fears. Carter Enterprises was undergoing a fundamental shift in mission. "We've spent decades building playgrounds for the rich," James declared in an emergency board meeting, his voice filled with a newfound conviction. "It's time we help build foundations for everyone else." He outlined a plan, shocking in its scope, a gradual pivot away from exclusively high-end luxury developments towards incorporating significant investments in affordable housing, community revitalization projects, vocational training centers, and educational initiatives in underserved neighborhoods. He wasn't dissolving the profitable core of the company overnight, but he was allocating substantial resources and future focus towards social impact. The centerpiece was the establishment of the Mike's Hope Foundation, heavily endowed by both Carter Enterprises and James's personal fortune. Its mandate was clear: tackle homelessness through a multi-pronged approach, funding shelters, supporting mental health and addiction services, providing job training and placement, and advocating for systemic change. And, in a move that surprised many, James invited Mike Donovan, not just as a figurehead, but as a paid senior advisor to the foundation. Mike, after careful consideration and assurance that his role would be substantive, accepted. He moved into modest transitional housing funded by the foundation and brought his invaluable lived experience and street-level wisdom to their strategies, ensuring the programs were grounded in reality, not just boardroom theories. Liam's reaction to his father's apology was complex. He was stunned, wary, and deeply conflicted. Years of hurt couldn't be erased by one public gesture, however dramatic. He didn't rush into his father's arms, but he saw something different in James's eyes, a vulnerability, a sincerity he hadn't seen before. When James, instead of demanding forgiveness or dictating terms, humbly asked Liam how he thought they could start rebuilding, Liam was cautiously receptive. James didn't force Liam into a corporate role. Instead, remembering Liam's passion for social justice issues, often expressed in ignored school essays, he suggested Liam take a gap year before college and work alongside Mike at the foundation. "Don't do it for me, Liam," James had said earnestly. "Do it if you believe in the work. Maybe we can learn about this together." Liam agreed. He started volunteering, then took on a structured internship at the foundation. He worked directly with Mike, learning about the systemic issues driving homelessness, hearing personal stories, and seeing the tangible impact of the foundation's projects. He also started spending tentative, scheduled time with his father, quiet dinners, walks, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. James didn't try to buy his affection. He offered his time, listened more than he talked, and shared carefully chosen memories of Emily, helping Liam connect with a mother he barely knew. It was slow, awkward work, rebuilding trust brick by painful brick. There were setbacks. James faced pushback from shareholders concerned about the impact on profits. He had to navigate complex internal politics to shift the company culture. Liam sometimes retreated, old wounds surfacing. But James, guided by his experience with Mike and his commitment to Liam, persevered. He learned patience, humility, the importance of showing up consistently. Months later, volunteering side by side at the opening of a new job training center funded by Mike's Hope, James watched Liam talking easily with some of the center's first clients, explaining the computer literacy program. Mike stood nearby, overseeing the distribution of supplies, looking healthier, his eyes holding a renewed sense of purpose. Liam caught his father watching and offered a small, genuine smile. Later, as they were leaving, Liam paused. That construction story Mike told you, about losing his job after the accident, Liam said hesitantly. It reminded me of something Mom used to say about how everyone deserves a safe place to land when they fall. James stopped, emotion welling up. He reached out, placing a hand awkwardly on Liam's shoulder. Your mother, she would be proud of you, Liam, of the man you're becoming. Liam looked at his father, searching his face. Then, unexpectedly, he leaned in and gave James a brief, slightly stiff, but genuine hug. It was the first time in over a decade. Maybe, Liam mumbled into his father's shoulder, she'd be proud of you too. Eventually, James hugged his son back, tears stinging his eyes. He knew the journey wasn't over, but this fragile moment felt like reaching solid ground after a long storm. He looked towards Mike, who gave him a slight nod of understanding. The billionaire CEO, the neglected son, and the homeless man who had inadvertently brought them together. They were all rebuilding, finding hope in unexpected places. James Carter finally understood that his true empire wasn't built of steel and glass, but of connection, forgiveness, and the enduring human capacity for change. A lesson learned while chained to reality, a lesson that redefined the meaning of wealth forever.